Hello everyone and welcome to the Rumi Forum Luncheon Series. We have with us today Dr. Kenneth Bedell, who's a Senior Advisor in the Faith-Based and Neighbourhood Partnership Centre at the Department of Education, and he'll be talking about the topic supporting and encouraging communities to become involved in school reform. Ken, we leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, this is a real opportunity and excited to be here to talk about this, and I'm going to just kind of lay out a few ideas and then we can have some discussion and talk about education and particularly how communities can become involved in education. I thought that maybe what I'd start with is to think about the President's comment that he made in the State of the Union, where he lifted up education and pointed out that it is the responsibility of the community and the family and as well as the schools to take part in the education of our children, and that also then. Later in the State of the Union, when the President talked about how great it would be if we took science fairs as seriously as we take something like the Super Bowl. Well, that may sort of sound like the sound bites that are really great to have at a State of the Union address. But what I'd like to argue for the next couple of minutes is that they're not just sound bites or something that we might think, oh, this is obviously a bipartisan issue, who's going to be against educating our children? But that the approach that the President is taking to education is actually grounded on some real fundamental beliefs and some fundamental values that both the President and Secretary Arne Duncan have as they're presenting what ultimately becomes budgets and proposals for educational reform. I'd like to lift up two philosophical underpinnings of the President's and the Secretary's approach to education. The first one is the idea that every child can learn. Now, that may not sound as if that's a particularly radical proposition, but one of the ways that we've evolved our American education system is with a system that's called tracking. And so children are put into certain tracks, and sadly, some children are put into a track that doesn't take them towards being college or career ready, that is not the track that offers them high quality college preparatory courses, or even in some cases advanced placement courses aren't even available to them. There's two ways that tracking is happening. One is within a school, that there's certain children that said, oh, you're not going to make it, and other children then who are put into college preparatory classes. The other way that tracking happens is really across schools, that there'll be a whole school that doesn't offer advanced placement courses, doesn't offer courses that really prepare students for college or even for career. That in the President's book, The Audacity of Hope, he tells a story about going to a school in Chicago. And as he's at that school, one of the teachers says to him, well, there is the those kids syndrome. And he asks him about, well, the those kids syndrome. Says, yeah, the attitude that, well, those kids aren't going to make it, or those kids are going to have a hard time getting ready for college, or those kids will never go to college. And she said, it isn't those kids, it's our kids. And the President in The Audacity of Hope explains how for him that was a moment of really realizing that the point is that that every child can learn that all children are our children, and that all children are part of what need to be taken seriously in terms of our public education system. Arnie Duncan often tells the story of his mother, who about the time of his birth was asked to teach a Sunday school class. And there were 8 girls sitting around in a circle, and they only had one Bible. Said, okay, well, we'll pass the Bible around. You can each read this Bible. And much to her horror, they couldn't read. And this, for her, was a moment where his mother said, well, I'm gonna get involved. And she started an after-school tutoring program, which Arnie Duncan spent his years growing up then, going to this after-school program with his mother. And these were his friends, his playmates, and then his friends, and then as they grew up and went to college and became professionals, continued to be his friends. And Arnie Duncan says, he doesn't use the president's language of those kids, but the point is that every kid can learn, and that needs to be fundamental in the way that we look at schools and at our education system. This is my own story. I graduated from college and moved to New York City and was trying to go to graduate school, and I found out that if you had a college degree at that point, this was actually 1970, that in 1970 New York City would give you a emergency teaching certificate. And so I went down one day, and that afternoon, because I had a college degree, I had an emergency certificate. And because I had a degree in chemistry, I had an emergency certificate to teach chemistry. But what I did was went out to a school in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Coleman Intermediate School, and became what was called a permanent substitute. I was there on Monday and Fridays when they just knew teachers didn't show up, and they needed a certain number of extra teachers because that's what was happening. The school where several of the kids one afternoon, I was with them and I was talking to them about the study of science and the Bronx School of Science, and they just said to me, no one from this school has ever gone to the Bronx School of Science. And yet my experience was that they were ready, capable, able to learn, and yet that particular school was, today, what Arnie Duncan would call a dropout factory, preparing students to go to high school where they weren't prepared to actually do school. But my experience was that they were bright, eager, and it was a matter of what the school was doing, that they weren't learning. This fundamental that all kids can learn is one of the philosophical basis of what the administration is doing in education. It's saying we need to build up those schools that aren't doing this. To start, Arnie Duncan talks about is building from the bottom, to make sure that every school takes seriously that there are courses to prepare students, and so that they're actually learning, and at the end of high school or college or career ready. The second one that I want to just talk about briefly, that's a philosophical underpinning of what the president's talking about when he talks about his education in the State of the Union, is a complete education. And I brought with me the exact wording that's in the blueprint for reform of education. I just want to read this so you get the words exactly what the blueprint says. It says, students need a well-rounded education to contribute as citizens in our democracy and to thrive in a global economy, from literacy to mathematics, science and technology, to history, civics, foreign languages, and the arts. financial literacy, and other subjects. That it's a fundamental of the understanding of the reform that the President and Arne Duncan want to bring, that a complete education is essential. That it isn't just learning how to read and write, but learning across the board, including, and here I want to reference again President Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope, where he talks about his own religious education and uses that as an example of what's essential in a complete education. That religious education is part of what needs to be included in a complete education. Well, those two pillars, that every child can learn and that we need to have a complete education, are two of the foundations that then the policy, the education policy, gets built on, that ultimately results in programs that are designed to make a difference in education. At the federal level, there's only about 10% of the federal budget, 10% of the total education budget that is paid for by the federal government. So for every $10 that's spent on the education of children in America, $1 of that comes from the federal government. And what Arne Duncan and the President have said, well, we need to use that strategically. We need to be clear that we're working on really making a difference in what happens in the schools that are currently failing our kids. And we need to make sure that we're supporting innovation, and where there are good things that are happening, and we need to focus the federal approach on beginning with those fundamentals and then making a difference where the federal government can make a difference. Before we start kind of a conversation, I'd like to jump from those fundamentals to, well, what does it mean for people in this room, for anyone in America, to participate in this education agenda that the President has? And just to point to a few of those. At one end, there's the starting of schools, or having a public charter school, or actually opening a school to say, we're going to take seriously education and the education of children by providing that. But there's also a very important place in supporting those, and particularly in the schools that are having the most difficult time of providing after school and summer programs, where faith-based groups and other community-based organizations can partner with each other and with the school to make sure that there are additional support for children that are in school. But probably an even more important thing that faith